Hi, this is Lee with Allison from the Law School Toolbox and the Bar Exam Toolbox. Today we are sharing a top tip for passing the bar exam. The last tip we're going to focus on today is the importance of the mental game, which is a lot.
Yeah, and I think, this is, like we said, it's a very stressful, hard thing to do. A lot of people are struggling, with some mental health issues already, particularly things around anxiety. Maybe you're getting accommodations for various things. Like there's a lot going on for a lot of people. And I think having support and also just having a strategy for how you're going to handle the ups and downs of this process, because it's never going to be completely smooth, whether we're talking about the day of or we're talking about the preparation. You might get to the test and the first answer or first essay you look at is something that you're like, oh my gosh, that was exactly what I was hoping not to see.
Yep.
And there it is.
There it is. And you still have to keep going. You can't stop.
Like you got to do something with it.
Yeah.
And I think that's going to be a challenge for people who are taking California because they're going to get one at a time. And if it is one where you're just like, oh my gosh,
you have to sit with it for all 60 minutes.
You got to sit there on camera for 60 minutes and like try to come up with something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I also think that, you look around like other hard things that people do. I thought about this a lot when I was watching the Olympics, because there's a lot of discussion now about performance coaches and, the greats are using therapists and things like that. And like, what do you think they're talking about? Like they're talking about failure and fear of failure. And of course they have pressure and media and all of that stuff. But a lot of it is how do they stay present and not, think of the next thing or worry about the consequences. Everybody acknowledges that if the stakes are high, that this is very important. So if you're struggling with your mental game, you want to figure out what resources that you can tap into. Because if you walk into the room and feel the panic rising and have your mind go blank, which is totally possible, happens to people in the room all the time, it's a fight or flight response. It's nothing like special to you. Your mind and body think you're being chased by a lion. And so all the oxygen gets deprived from your brain to go to other essential organs. So of course you cannot think, but you can't write an essay in that
Right.
way. Like you can't do it. You've got to have a way to get yourself out of it.
Right. And you need to have actually planned that out and practiced it, because like when your brain goes blank from test anxiety, you have to do something like a breathing exercise to actually get it back online. And if you're just sitting there panicking, being like, oh my gosh, oh my gosh, oh my gosh, that can very easily spiral. And you might end up wasting half the time and never write anything. These are the things that can really derail your exam day.
Yeah.
So these are things you have to have worked on beforehand. And there are tons of different options, but you need to find something that you can consistently go to. I think that, again, going back to the Buddhists, they talk about training as a warrior. And they're not talking about going out to shoot people. They're talking about training your mind so that when you're in a situation that's very stressful, that training is almost habitual.
Yes. I mean, now I can talk about cold plunging, which I do love to talk about.
How many of these Superman videos have you been watching, Lee? I feel like that's something you would be into.
He is into that, but that's not why I'm into it. But, the interesting thing about cold plunging is that they say it's great for anxiety and dopamine, like controlling your dopamine levels.
Yeah.
Yes. And all of that stuff. I love that book. Anyway, but one of the things that's interesting is if you do it semi-regularly, which I now do because that's the point in my life I'm at where I cold plunge, but it is amazing when you practice calming your nervous system, because the thing is it initiates a fight or flight response. Your body does not want you to go in. It is very cold in there, but you have to be uncomfortable and tell your mind that you are safe and that it is fine and that you're going to do it anyway. And there's a small period of time where you feel the anxiety and then you feel it dissipate. It is a very powerful thing. We can create other situations, maybe without 50-degree water, where you can do that as well. But it is this idea that the more you do it, the more used to it you are. And then that fight or flight response doesn't get as big because your body is used to like calming itself down. So when you sit down to do this very important practice that makes you uncomfortable, that might be anxiety inducing, yes, you might feel the adrenaline start to pump, even if it's just to sit down and do a practice question, you then have to say like, well, this is my opportunity to take those deep breaths and calm my nervous system down so I can do it in the exam room since there's no cold plunge at the bar.
Yeah, I remember when I was doing my open water scuba certification, we did it in Monterey Bay in like a 7mm wetsuit, and most people were actually in dry suits, but they wouldn't let us do that because it wasn't like in the rules of how you got certified. And I remember going underwater and basically having like a physical panic attack on the body because it was so cold. And I'd never been in a wetsuit before. I didn't know that, like, of course, it has to warm up.
Like, it has to be cold first.
For a minute, you're just literally in this literal, like, freezing cold water. And your body is just like, I've got to get out of here. And one girl did. She went up and she's like, this is not for me. But I remember sitting on the bottom and I was like negotiating with myself of like, okay, this is really unpleasant. You want to leave. Why don't you just try to wait like 5 minutes, see how it goes? And then I started looking around and then it was great. I was like, wow, this is beautiful. I'm like in the aquarium, but it's real life, you know, and I was fine. But I remember that sensation of like, I can't do this.
Yeah. So what's also interesting is I bet if you're worried about kind of this mental game piece of the bar, you can go through your life and say, what other hard things have I done? You know, what situations have I been in where that panic has set in? I think for most people, we can come up with a few different, you know, scenarios of where you really like felt this physical response to panic. And then how did you get out of it? You know, how did you work through it? How did you get to the other side? And take those lessons. You know, I think sometimes we let these tests like sit by themselves, like they're their own thing that don't relate to any other things in life. When a lot of these are life skills. Life is hard and you end up doing a lot of really hard things. There are plenty of hard things that sometimes I'll be sitting in my car not wanting to do the next hard thing I have to do. And I will take a few minutes to prepare myself to do the hard thing that I don't want to do.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, like
all
take
the time.
those deep breaths, like, okay, I'm just going to sit, you know, I'm going to center myself before I have this conversation. And then you go do it.
Yeah. And so, you know, you have some of these skills as life skills. And if you don't have these skills, they're great life skills. So
this is a great time to start
develop them because life doesn't really get much easier. So
fair.
You know.
I mean, if you're going to be a lawyer, there are going to be moments where you're like, oh my gosh, I feel sick about what I'm having to like step into. I'm not qualified for this. I don't, you know, whatever storyline you've got going on. But, you know, you're going to feel, I mean, I definitely remember as a lawyer just being like, what, I'm so over my head right now.
Yeah.
And I still have to go
syndrome,
in, you know,
like you name it, right?
I mean, still have to go take this deposition, you know, even though I literally have no idea what I'm doing.
Yeah. And, you know, not to say that it makes it easy. None of it makes it easy, but it allows you to do it without like that big paralyzing response. And so, you know, this is all learned stuff. Most of us are not hardwired to find this easy. People who are type A and perfectionists, I think especially, we put so much pressure on ourselves. And that's a lot of people in law school have that personality structure. So we then have to do the extra work to make sure that we can not let those tendencies just, you know, really drive us into the ground. It's not worth it. Because you can't show up as your best self. All you're trying to do is show up as a pretty good version of yourself to give yourself the best shot at passing. That's really like what this game is.
I'll bring it back to skiing. So I'm preparing for a ski exam, and part of what they do is they make you ski like bumps, which I don't like skiing bumps. But the reason somebody told me they make you do it is because that's where people fall apart. So they're trying to see basically when we put you on something that is uncomfortable, do you have the habits in place sufficiently that you can get through it in kind of like a reasonable manner? Nobody's expecting perfection, but are you going to totally fall apart, or are you going to get it 80% and like pass the exam?
Yeah.
That's what we're kind of looking for. No one's going to perform their absolute best on test day because you're under a lot of stress.
Yeah. And you don't want that stress to be the driver of your performance.
Yeah, you just can't. You have to find ways for it not to be.
Yeah. These are all learned skills. So you don't have to cold plunge or ski bumps. You can just like do hard things. There are plenty of hard things that you have to do in your life. I mean, but I think just being aware of this as you do anything you don't want to do. I mean, like, I don't like to go to the dentist. I have to sit and like psych myself out to go to the dentist. I mean,
I don't know. I'm one of those people. I'm like, it's not
I know
pleasant. It
you
doesn't
like
really
the
bother me.
dentist.
I
I
don't like
know.
the dentist. Nobody likes the dentist, but
That's
it
a
doesn't
fair point.
really, it's just not my, it's not my like stress point. I have
I
other
know.
stress points.
I-
We all have them.
We all have them. But I think you can use those stress points as a practice. And if you just start to develop this practice, it will serve you as a lawyer because, as you said, law jobs are stressful. Even the ones that aren't the most stressful are still really stressful. And you're dealing with folks who typically are in extreme situations. So even if your stress is manageable, you might be in a meeting with someone whose stress is off the roof, over the roof,
Off the charts.
off the charts. I'm just mixing all my metaphors today. But, you're going to need to like hold enough space to hold somebody else's anxiety too. So use this as a practice for being just the best lawyer you can be.
So the bar exam is a metaphor for life.
Well, with that, thanks so much for watching. Don't forget to subscribe and give us a like and leave us a comment if you have any questions about anything. And stay tuned for more bar exam tips.